Hello, my name's John and I run the Friends of Dorothy in Manchester group. We have about 60, 70 members. We do various activities. We meet once a month or maybe more. We go to the theatre, cinema, go out for meals, or we have just chat. And sometimes we play cards, any board games as well. Today I'm going to talk about my hobby, which is keeping chickens, as you can see. Right, now the history of chickens is quite complex. It goes back a long time. 5,000 years ago BC, I'm not sure how they know this, red jungle fowl were first seen. They were very large chickens, had very long beaks and very long claws, and were very tall. So if you saw one flying along, I think you'd be quite petrified at night. Right, so today I'm going to look at where to buy chickens. Now, if you want to keep chickens, you need to get some good chickens. I go to a farm in Preston, and it's a large farm, and all the chickens are free range. They run about fields, and when I go there, I pick a chicken, and the girls catch it with a large net. You can imagine just like a carry-on film, chasing the chickens around the field. You can also go to, I think where to go, or a show. You can go to a chicken show, but they are quite expensive. So I wouldn't recommend that particularly, but you learn a lot. You can also get battery hens, which what I should have done really, but I didn't. You can buy them very cheaply, and so that also you can look in the paper. Right, now there are three types of chickens really. There's hybrids, there's pure breeds, and there's bantams. Most people have heard of bantam chickens. They're a lot smaller and lay small eggs. I wouldn't particularly recommend them, unless you've got a very tiny garden. First of all, when I bought them, I went for pure breeds, but I wouldn't recommend them either actually, because they look pretty as Buff Orpingtons. They look beautiful chickens, but they lay less eggs, and when they do lay eggs, well, this is my experience, they become very broody, which means they want to sit on the eggs and hatch them. So that is difficult, and when that happened, we didn't quite know what was happening. So we looked on the internet and we decided to put cold water in the bottom, you name it, we tried it, but nothing worked. As soon as you take the chicken off the eggs, they run back and get on the chickens because it's instinct. Now, so I have pure breeds, which is sort of a mixture of everything really, and they're much more friendly. Well, sometimes, I don't think it is today. Now, parts of a chicken, there's various parts of a chicken. This is called the comb, which should be really bright red, and it should stand up. When the chicken's not well, the comb goes over. Under the beak here, sometimes when the top bit of the beak goes over, and that's the problem for the chickens, and you can actually cut them. They don't mind. I've never actually this chicken probably didn't need it actually. I don't mind doing it, but I've never actually done it. They're just the same as fingernails. Underneath, yeah, there's the wattle, which is like a big red skin, like me, double chin. They have like a double chin there. Now the eyes are very spectacular. They miss nothing. They can see an insect, they can see from a long way away. The ears are here, I don't know if you can see. The ears are there, they're hidden, and they have an ear lobe. This is called the cape on the back of the neck. This is called the saddle, and these are the saddle feathers. And at the back, there's the fluff, it's called the fluff. So it's very fluffy. And there's the vent where the eggs come out and you name it comes out. Now, if you get chickens, I'd recommend to get more than two. They are social animals, so you need to sort of put two together. You can make your own house. I'm not very good at DIY, so I had to buy my own house. And you have to have a little box at the back where they can nest in. I'll show you actually. Hold on to get rid of this one. I'll show you what to do. This is the run, so at night I can lock them up. If I decide to go out, I can put them in here and they're fox-proof. Here's where they lay. Actually, there's an egg in there. That's not set up. And there's a chicken laying at the back. A light Sussex. Can you see her? And there's 3 perches that they perch on at night. Right, we'll let her lay an egg. They also love dust baths, so if you need a little area to have a dust bath, that gets rid of the mites. And to preen themselves, there's a little a gland at the back. They put their beak on it and then they stroke their feathers with it. So the oil goes into the feathers and they lay, actually, you can actually see that over there, they're laying down and they may stretch their wings and roll over and flick dirt onto themselves, and that gets rid of the mites. That's the theory. Now chickens, what do they eat? Chickens have no teeth, not like myself, mine are all paid for. So they need to eat grit, which you can see down here, an oyster shell. That goes into the gizzard and that breaks down the food. I feed my chickens regular, it's called pellets. You can either get pellets or chicken mash. This is every vitamin, you name it, it's in there, or amino acids, everything. And that's very easy and very clean to do. You can get layers mash, and that is like a powder, but that gets everywhere. I wouldn't particularly recommend that, and it gets very wet. Now, also, when the eggs are produced, I'll just go through, actually if you look at the chicken there, you can see her stretching her wing. She's stretching in the sunshine. They're all stretching now. They do love sunshine. Now, a lot of people think you need a cockerel to have eggs. You don't. If you do decide to have a cockerel, beware. Do you want all your neighbours woken up at 4:30, 5 o'clock with a cock crowing? So that I'd beware of that. The egg production it's a bit like a female actually. These chickens here would have about 250 eggs each year. And one egg will break away from the ovary, and the yolk will break away, and it will slowly grow and walk down the ovary, slowly turning. Then it'll come to the oviduct, and that's where the white is put in to the egg. And then it'll go down to uterus. So that's then the egg is formed in that area, and then it takes about 25 hours. If you go to a supermarket, people say, well, if the yolk of an egg is very, very yellow, they think it's a good egg. It's not true. I can make an egg yolk any colour I want. Well, not any colour, but I can make it a dark yellow, a pale yellow. What to look for in an egg is the white. It should be very gelatinous, and that's very thick. Sometimes, I'm not saying all supermarkets, sometimes supermarkets keep them in there, they can be there 30 days, and that is dangerous really, because the whites become just like water, so you don't know what you're actually getting. Now, the diseases in chickens, they don't get many diseases. They get scaly legs, which I can't really show you, but that means they get a mite into the legs, under the scales, and the scales start to stick out. The chickens can become lame, and that is a danger. So what you can do is get Vaseline, you put Vaseline on the eggs, or surgical spirit, or you can get a specialised spray. Vaseline seems to work very well, and that keeps them clean. They also get red mites. Now red mites, I've just had a horrific time with red mites. I have a wooden hut, so red mites live in little nooks and crannies here. And they start off, they're little black mice, they're tiny, very, very small. And then from there, at night, they walk along the perches and go onto the chickens and drink the blood. So I'm trying to avoid that. And you can get various different diatomaceous earth, you can put that on the chickens and that kills them all. Or you just clean them out. I clean out mine about once a month, and that seems to get rid of them. Also, when I clean out, they actually go into my hair, and it makes me itch and go in my ear. So I have to have a shower after I've done that. Other diseases are, you get a chicken called bumblefoot. It's like what we get, I've got hard skin, and that can be razored off. We didn't know how to do that first. The chicken was lame, so we looked it up, and it's underneath the pad of the chickens, of the foot, you just cut it off with a razor blade. It doesn't bleed, and we just put some disinfectant on the chicken, and it was fine. So, all I can say is, if you want to keep chickens, it is a very enjoyable hobby, and enjoy it. And they'll give you, weeks and weeks of fun. Lots of chickens have been in our language for years. If you think about it, it's hen night, broody, don't count your chickens. So that's basically it. And I hope you enjoy this little talk, and I hope it's been informative. I'd just like to thank O2 for sponsoring this event. They are the only network that work in this area. So thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
So welcome to our allotment. My name's David, a member of Manchester Friends of Dorothy, and I'm going to do a little talk about bees today. So perhaps first of all, start with the most obvious thing, with looking at the hive and seeing that at the hive entrance there's an awful lot of activity. And most of this activity is from female foraging bees. So you can see lots of bees darting up, and on a warm summer's day there'll be lots more than this. But you can see lots of bees sort of coming onto the landing board and shooting off in all sorts of different directions, and a whole lot of other bees coming in and landing on the board and going inside. And I don't know if you can see it really, but the ones that do land to go in, there's one. They've got little yellow bobbles on their back legs. They've got 3 sets of legs, and on the back legs, and they're the pollen sacs. So the foraging bees obviously are out foraging, and they can cover an area of up to 30 square kilometers from here, so a radius of 30 square kilometers, and they're going to collect 4 things. Everybody knows that they go and collect nectar, and we've all seen a bee land on a flower head, and the proboscis or a long tongue goes in and sucks out the nectar from the plant, and at the same time they get absolutely covered in pollen. And if you observe closely, after finishing feeding, the bee will just hover a little bit, clean itself of pollen, and store the pollen in those back legs, and then off it goes to another plant to feed, get covered in pollen. It pollinates at the same time, and that's how we're so dependent on bees to pollinate our food, fruit, vegetables and flowers, as well as other insects. So that's how they collect nectar. And a little interesting point is, when they do collect nectar, it slightly changes the electrical charge on the plant. So the next bee that comes along can see that, there's nothing there, I'll go to another plant. So that's interesting. So they collect nectar, they collect pollen, as I've said. They need water, so some bees will go out to collect water. And the other thing that these bees are collecting more in the spring, because they go to tree buds and they collect resin, and they mix that resin with their own secretions and wax and turn it into propolis, which is like, we'd see it as a really strong varnish to seal the hive, make it watertight and keep it warm. So the most of this activity is from foraging bees, but you will also see, if you look closely, a bee will come out onto the landing board, fly up in a twirl, and then come down again and go back inside. And they're young bees who are the first time they will have been outside, and they're doing orientation flights. So they're just getting used to being outside. A third thing that you might see on the landing board here is a bigger bee, a fatter bee, and with a buzz that's deeper, and they are the drones. So they are the male bees, and their sole job is to eat, drink and be merry. So their sole job is to fertilize the queen. So you'll see them, they're much faster. You'll never see them on a flower, because that's not what they do. They leave the hive, they zoom off for 30 to 60 minutes, and they go to drone areas, and then they'll come back and stay in the hive. And that's kind of between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. The last rarer event that you might see, especially in a new hive, is the queen will appear. And if it's a new hive, she will be a virgin queen. She's a bigger bee, more slender, and she will do successive 30 to 60 minute flights and in order to mate. So she will go to these drone areas, and they basically she flies as fast as she can. The fastest drones that can keep up with her will mate with her. So it's a bit like speed dating. And she'll mate with maybe 10 to 15 drones. And when they mate, they're so enjoined together that the male cannot extract his genitalia. So when he tries to leave the female, his genitalia break off and he actually dies. So she mates with about 10 to 15 drones, and the next drone removes the genitalia, mates with her, dies, and so on, and until she sort of returns. Once she's fertilized, she will, that's it. That she stays inside and is the queen of the hive. I mean, there are other things that happen at the hive entrance, but they're the main things that you'll see. So moving inside the hive, and I'll just show you. The hive is usually in total darkness. Their native habitat is in the hollow of a tree. So I'll just show you the hive, and as you can see, these are the honeycomb. So the vertical comb, and lots, if you look closely, lots of bees all working, and I'll talk about that because they all have different roles. And I'll just show you the box below, because what happens is when they've filled this, and I'll explain with honey and brood and things like that, which I'll explain, they then move down to the lower box, and I'll just show you that because you can see pretty much empty, but they're building new comb. Oh, there's a bee with pollen on. Look, you can see the little pollen on the legs, little yellow dots. But they'll build comb, and they will fill this box with comb, and then my job as a beekeeper is to keep an eye on that, and when they've filled that box, I put another empty box underneath, and by the end of the summer, really I would have expected this hive to be more advanced than this, but the weather's not been that good. But you might expect at the end of the summer to have 4 boxes. So by then the queen will have moved down. She moves down each time, and as she leaves the eggs and things like that, they all hatch out, and it gets filled with honey. So by the end of the season in the autumn, you might have a box or 2 boxes of just wax and honey, and you may be able to harvest some honey, depending on if there are enough stores so that they can overwinter. Another thing, we've seen the comb, but what you would be able to see if you could look inside is the queen in the center here, and she is there, and now after she's been fertilized, really her main job is to produce eggs, and she's surrounded by her court, so you will see her in the middle and several bees surrounding her in a circle, and they're feeding her royal jelly, caring for her, combing her, cleaning her. And at the height of the summer, she'll be laying up to 1,000 eggs a day. So if you looked inside, that's what you would see. The hive itself is kept at pretty much a constant temperature at 35 degrees, and that's done by the younger bees sort of shivering their muscles, and it's kept pretty much at a constant humidity. And at the start of the season, early winter, there may be 8,000, 15,000 bees, and at the height, you know, when she's laying eggs and so on, which will be around about now, there'll maybe be up to 45,000 bees there. And then as the summer, we come into autumn, she stops laying so much, the hive numbers fall, and they get ready to sort of hibernate over winter, and the whole cycle continues. So there is the queen in there laying all these eggs. What happens to the eggs? Well, of course, with insects, they go from egg stage to larva to pupa, and then they hatch, and that whole process is pretty fixed over 21 days. So the bee hatches. It's got to get out of the cell by its own struggling power. If it can't do it, the other bees will kill it. If it does do it, the other bees will feed it. And each little phase I'm going to talk about lasts a couple of days. So other bees will feed it, and her job is to just stay around where she was hatched, clean her own cell out, clean a few more around there, and then after a couple of days she begins to start to feed herself, and that's when she uses her musculature to shiver and keep the hive warm. So that's one of her roles then. The next job for her, and each time she gets a new job, in a way it's moving from where she was hatched in the center of the hive, and progressively she's moving outwards and outwards each time. So her next job would be to feed and look after older larvae. Then she moves on to the younger brood, caring for the younger stages of the bee development. And if she's lucky, she may be one of those lucky bees that looks after the queen. She then becomes an odd jobber, repairing comb, capping honey. And the next stage, which we're getting to say day 10, day 11, is her first glimpse of the outside world. So that's when you'll see the bees, as I spoke about earlier, doing an orienteering flight. Her next job is really interesting because she will be a taker of the nectar. So what happens when these foraging bees land, they creep in there and you can see them going in, and the next bee will take the nectar from her, and the pollen, and once that's happened, off the forager goes again, and backwards and forth. But the job of that receiving bee is to take the nectar, and what happens to it then is the nectar is 8% water and honey is 20% water, so there's got to be a kind of evaporation process. So what she'll do is, the receiving bee with the nectar, she'll pull out her tongue, her proboscis, spread the nectar on it and leave it like that for 10-20 minutes. It evaporates a bit. She then passes it on to another bee who does the same, and it's passed on through the hive through lots of bees who add their own saliva, enzymes, things like that. By that stage, the first thing that it gets laid down in a brood cell, an empty brood cell. So where the brood is, where the eggs, the main egg area, is quite warm. So they'll lay the near honey in a warm brood cell, and you get even more evaporation until you get down to this 20% water content. And then a bee will take that from the open cell, store the honey on one of the cells on the outside, and it gets capped. And just to say that that's why, for humans and eating honey, all these enzymes and things that the bees add as it goes through, they're the health elements for us in honey. So I always say to people, eat raw honey. Supermarket honey is, if you actually look at the label on it, it'll say derived from various EU countries, and that means it may have been the bees may have been chemically treated. They need to sterilize the honey by I don't know how to do it, warming it a lot, in case there may be diseases in the honey, and it destroys all the enzymes. So basically, general supermarket honey to me is sugar water, but raw honey from your local farm shop is the thing to go for. Next job, general cleaning and clearing, and the kind of final job that she gets to do is guard duty. So guard bees are obviously will hover around here or be on that board, and they're looking for invading insects. So they'll stop invading insects or wasps, stop them or kill them, and as well as that, they'll stop bees from other hives if trying to get in. And actually, as winter comes on and all the drones get kicked out because they're a waste of energy, they will be there to stop the drones coming in and kill them from coming in. And the final job, these guards, is also that they act in a ventilation role. So sometimes on a hot day, they'll be there flapping their wings to ventilate the hive and keep it at a constant temperature. And on a warm summer's day, sometimes you can it's got a very aromatic smell. You can actually smell it. So as I said, the bee moves from inside to outside. That whole process that I talked about, different jobs, different tasks, will last 21 days. And interestingly, as they mature to do all these different tasks, the body parts change to what, their roles. So that 21 days doing that, then they become these foraging bees. And then they live 21 days foraging and then die. So that means in the summer, a bee from start to beginning lives about 6 weeks. When they overwinter, they adapt and their organs change, and they can overwinter for 6 months. I just want to talk about 2 other activities within the hive. The first one you may have heard about is the waggle dance. Now the waggle dance is a way of a foraging bee communicating to all these other bees where there's a great source of nectar. And this dance has 2 components. One is the line of direction, and one is the frequency and intensity of the dance. So it's a figure of 8, so they'll do a line and then a circle and then the line again and a circle, and depending on where that line is, and it's aligned in relation to the sun, and the frequency and intensity of the dance. And don't forget, it's dark, they can't actually see the dance, the other bees are feeling her with their antennae, and it's a way of her to say, in relation to the sun and the distance they need to travel, where I've been for this nectar. Not only that, they can smell her, and she sometimes feeds the bees with some of the foraging goodies, so that the other bees can really identify the site of nectar. Even they can communicate the sugar content. Don't ask me how they know that, but they can even communicate to the other bees the sugar content of the nectar. The second thing I'd just like to talk about that may go on in here is production of queen cells and swarming. So after 2 years, 3 years, obviously it's a hive with 1 queen. The queen bees are always feeding each other, and they communicate that way, and the queen sends out a pheromone, and her nursing bees take it in and pass it on and so on, and she communicates with the hive in this way, and after 2 or 3 years she starts to flag a bit. The pheromones fall and it triggers a reaction in the bees, that the whole hive thinking this queen's flagging, so they think we need to produce another queen. So they start to make, instead of the little hexagonal cells that you see, they start to make queen cells, which are kind of almost like a peanut shell. They draw out cells usually on the edge of the comb. The queen lays an egg in there, that's her role, and then the other bees start feeding. They may form a dozen queen cells, sometimes 2 dozen. the other bees start feeding this potential queen just royal jelly, and they will develop into potential queens. And what will happen is the first queen to hatch, she will kill the other queen cells. That's if the rest of the bees, I mean, she may kill them all, or she may not be allowed to kill them all by the other bees. But basically, let's say she kills them all, and that's a signal then for the hive to swarm. So the old queen will then take maybe a third of these bees and swarm away, leaving the new virgin queen with the rest of the bees. And that's where we talked about, you know, once you might see that virgin queen do the mating flights. So I mean, to see a swarm is spectacular. So it, you know, it's like a plague of locusts filling the air, and but the whole thing's over in about 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So you'll get a massive swirl of bees. I mean, there can be 20,000 bees, but they won't go far. They may land on a neighbour's tree, and they'll start. The queen will land and be surrounded by a few bees, and then her pheromones will attract the rest of the swarm until eventually, as you've probably seen live or in pictures, you'll get that big ball of bees, and they're full of honey because they need the energy to find a new home, and that's how. And the swarming period is May to July, pretty much, and that's how bees reproduce. So that swarm will be looking for a new home, and swarming does produce genetically stronger queens and bees, which are more resistant to disease. So that's pretty much, well, I'd just like to say that's why I like to keep bees naturally, because you allow them to build their own comb, you allow them to respond to their own environment, you interfere less, and that makes them less stressed, and as a superorganism allows them to have stronger immunity to disease. In terms of honey and wax, we'd only take a box of honey and wax if the bees had enough to overwinter, and it's pretty easy to extract it at home, really. That way you can just empty the box in the kitchen, squeeze it and let the honey drip through, and it's a simple process, and that's it. I'd just like to end though talking about this jar of honey. So I'd just like to let you know that to get this jar of honey, there may have been probably 4,000 bees that were involved in collecting this, and the foraging bees flight lasts 30-40 minutes, and there would have been maybe 40,000 flights to collect this jar of honey, and they will have visited 10 to 100 to maybe 200 species of flowers, and maybe 10 million flower heads to collect this. So, and as I said, over a 30 square kilometre area. So we can buy this for a few quid, but don't you think it's invaluable listening to that? So I'd just like to thank O2 for sponsoring Silver Pride. Thank you.